Hello, I'm John Farron. I'm the former editor of BBC Time Watch, and I thought up Digging for Britain.
I'm Sarah Jobling, and I also worked with John on Time Watch, and I'm one of the founding producers of the first series of Digging for Britain.
So what we're going to be doing today is just having a chat about how we made the first series of Digging for Britain. It's coming to you courtesy of the Content Club, which is a group of producers, historians, and history and archaeology fans who are getting together to try and make TV programs in a different way. It's a long time ago now, Sarah. What can you remember about the first days on the job with Digging for Britain?
First days, I can remember frantically looking for stories, with a sort of shortening amount of time, trying to find the best stories we could to go into production with. I can remember still discussing what the series was, what format it would take, and whether it would be a sort of long form history narrative or more of a magazine show. Whether myself and
magazine show is a dirty word back in those days. I mean, that's what digging really is. It's a classy magazine show, but no one liked that word back then, did they?
No, and I think probably partly because of that, we were quite keen at the time not to make a magazine show. We all had come from a history background as well. We wanted to make, a kind of good factual narrative.
We didn't really know what we were going to make, did we? I mean, we kind of sold this idea to Control of BBC Two on a brilliant line that I think Emma Parkin wrote, which was, "We may be a small country, but we've got a big history. Everywhere you walk, there are worlds beneath your feet," which just was tremendously evocative. I think maybe we decided quite early on it would be era by era, and you got the Anglo-Saxons. And how did you feel about that?
Pretty miffed at the time, if I'm honest. I remember sort of really hoping to get the Roman episode because Roman archaeology is so visual and the time period is so exciting and everybody knows quite a lot about it. And you can, in terms of archaeology, stuff survives, and we've all visited, Hadrian's Wall and various forts, and what does anyone really know about the Anglo-Saxons? So historically, I was slightly, disappointed because I didn't know much about them at that time. And in terms of archaeology, what I quickly realised was this was the Dark Ages, which to me it always, for a reason, to me it always meant, oh, this was a kind of dark period of history that, we don't know much about. But of course, part of that is because there is no archaeology, there is little archaeology. And so that's what I thought I was getting.
Okay. And so how do you start making a program that you don't know what it's going to be? You've got to cover the entire scope of Anglo-Saxon archaeology, a whole season, and nobody knows who we are. Well, how did that go, ringing up archaeologists?
Yeah, and also what you just said then did remind me of something, the different approach with the magazine show and what we did start out making, which was more of a structured historical narrative that was sort of telling the story of the Anglo-Saxon period through the archaeology. And of course then you have to find stories that are going to help you tell that whole span of history. And so it does put a slightly different emphasis on the way that you find stories. Do I want 3 stories from, the Roman crossing over to the Anglo-Saxon period? Probably not, whereas if it's a magazine show, obviously it's just where are the best stories. So part of it is finding great stories that have got, different and vibrant stories that are going to be something you can turn into accessible television and not just academic.
Yeah. And so what are the elements that go through your head as a producer? You're thinking visual, what can I film?
Yeah.
Who's going to tell me the story?
Yeah. What story are they going to tell me? Is it a story that involves human beings? sounds really strange, but you know, these archaeological stories that connect us to humans, are they dramatic? Have they got the sort of elements in them that everyone, not just archaeologists, is going to be drawn to? You know, love, violence, death, whatever the kind of human elements are. But also, is there something, what are we going to be able to point a camera at, and what's going to look good on screen?
I remember using the term, we are doing respectable ghost hunting quite a lot, using the archaeology to try and bring people back to life. We were trying to create the new face of history. And I'd seen bits and pieces that Alice had done, I think on Time Team, actually. And there's just an X factor with television. It's what makes making documentaries or television so interesting is you just don't know. Someone can be absolutely brilliant in your office and absolutely have you on the edge of your seat, and then you put them in front of a camera, and the camera we say, the camera doesn't like them. The camera loves Alice. Alice is a really smart, warm, witty person. And you get all of that plus a bit of X factor when you put her in front of a camera. I mean, she's just a brilliant presenter, and she was a very, very good presenter from the get-go, I think.
Yeah, it was, you know, for me, the kind of big memories of that are, you know, when you do have a site that is typically Anglo-Saxon, so it's, let's say, an Anglo-Saxon hall, and what that actually means is a field of mud, you know, with some holes. And you kind of think, what am I going to do with this? And actually, when you have Alice presenting, you know, you just know it's going to be okay, because she can ask the right questions. She has a background of knowledge, but she has huge enthusiasm, you know, for the subject, but also away from that, she does just, you know, bring everything to life. Like, she is magnetic when she's on camera. So often I'd find myself feeling a bit depressed about the location, and then we'd start doing the pieces to camera, and I would just be grinning behind the camera, because I knew that, you know, this was great, and that she had this quality that people were just going to get drawn in to whatever she was talking about.
One thing we learned very, very quickly on is Alice does love a skeleton.
Yeah, and so do we then as directors, because we know that she's going to be able to bring that specialist knowledge and you know, just bring the story to life so much more than a presenter who doesn't have that. But also, skeletons are fantastic to point a camera at, and, you know, really kind of connect you to the past in a way that perhaps that is more immediate than objects can. And
I remember seeing some early material that you brought back of Alice and three skeletons up at Bamborough, I think it was, wasn't it? Bamborough Castle?
Yeah.
A bit about that.
Yeah, that was one of my favourite stories for all those reasons we just talked about. And these skeletons in particular were very, they all came from an Anglo-Saxon sort of high status burial ground, graveyard, obviously, because it's near the castle, and they all had very different stories, and they were all very clearly marked in their skeletons. So there was a skeleton of somebody who just had terrible teeth. You know, you could just see all of the plaque built up on their teeth so clearly, and what that could tell you about the diet of these people was immense. And then there was I remember really two quite tragic stories. One skeleton was of a very young man, you know, probably we're talking a teenager, who had been met a violent death. He'd been killed blow of a heavy sword, and you could very clearly see that his pelvis had just been sliced off on one side, and the sword had gone down and sliced his unsurvivable injury. And from that, you know, it's not just telling you, this is not just physical evidence of you know, of the kind of a piece of anatomy. This is, you're teaching you something about the world that he lived in, that this was a young boy, a young man who could meet and like this, because it was a warrior society. And then there was also it was quite hard to tell. There was a conversation, actually, I don't know if you remember, between Alice and the on-site osteoarchaeologist. What was nice was she was sort of learning on location, because she looked at you know, a part of the skeleton, and she said, well, this is obviously you know, a juvenile. But another part of the skeleton looked like an older individual, and it was a person who had obviously suffered from some kind of disability or disease, a disabling disease, and you could extrapolate from that, and they extrapolated from that, that back in high status kind of, the stronghold of Bamborough around there, which we're talking the seat of kings, this is high status sort of society. Here was a young man who was severely disabled, you could tell from his skeleton, and he was buried in a high status cemetery. And he also reached a certain age of life. I think he was like a young man. So he's obviously been looked after, and he's obviously been accorded the same kind of respect in death as the other members of the society. And I think there was some real learning from Alice on location. She was bringing her knowledge, but also, learning from the on-site experts, and together they pieced together the picture of these people.
Yeah, and I think it was things like that when we looked at them in the edit and thought, this is archaeologists talking to, an osteoarchaeology physician, Alice, with expertise of her own, and they're letting us into their world, and they're in charge, trying to get them to tell. But we're not making them ham it up or anything. We're letting the audience into the world. And I think authenticity maybe is the word of what we were after. And I think that is totally what we landed. And I think that's why the series has lasted as well and has progressed as well as it has. Just want to take you back to the actual process a little bit. I mean, so you turn up to Bamborough, you've got your cameraman, Tom Pridham, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's day one and you've got to get quite a lot of material out. I mean, is it exciting starting a filming day? Is it terrifying? What's your biggest enemy? What's your biggest hope?
So it's sort of the apprehension beforehand is quite stressful. It's, when you don't know, are we going to get the weather that we need? Are we going to find a room if we haven't recce'd the room, which sometimes you just can't? Are we going to find a room that is impossible to film in, absolutely ugly, too small to get our camera and team into, and to get into a position where you've got decent camera angles? What's the contributor going to be like? Are they going to freeze on camera? Are the skeletons going to be as clearly marked and evocative as they say they are? Because we haven't seen them because they've been in storage. And so the first thing you would do would be, or I would do, there are no rules, is check out the room and take my cameraman, take Tom, and decide where we're going to shoot from, where is a good place to lay the skeletons out, what we're going to do about the lighting. The dream is that you get into a room like that and there's no air conditioning, so you don't have to worry about that, or some other buzzing that you can't switch off, and it's not near somewhere really noisy, and the light is controllable. And then once we've set up the room, once Tom is happy with what he's doing and he's busy setting up the lighting and getting everything right, is probably the time that I would then chat to Alice and the on-site expert about what I want to get out of this conversation. And Alice would know, well, these are, for example, the 3 points I definitely want to hit. I know that this, we need to find out that this was a young person who was killed by a sword, and these are the bits that we can really see on the skeleton.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because we've done it again. We've forgotten the sound man. We've talked about the presenter and we've talked about the cameraman. Sorry, sound men out there, we always forget you. Obviously, without your fantastic hard work, we wouldn't be able to hear anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and I think you probably agree, but one of the things, I love making a film look good visually, but one of the things I've really learned is that you just can't get away with bad sound, and actually you sort of can get away with bad visuals sometimes. And Bamborough was a really good place for sound because it's a castle on the edge of a rock almost, with the sea on one side and lots of long grass around it, so there aren't motorways to worry about, there aren't planes flying overhead, there aren't crowds of students going to their lectures, and the room was totally controllable.
Thanks for that. That's a really good insight into one pretty successful day. You don't feel, oh, that was a really successful day, or do you? I don't know, at the end of a day like that.
You are always uncertain and you always feel like you could have done something better. I don't think that's ever not been the case. I think we're all always pushing all the time to make it the best we can, but we also all feel that if we'd had more time, we could have done this. If we'd had more money, we could have had another camera. We could have, and so you don't really know until you get into the edit, and then you start piecing everything. You have an idea and a feeling. I apart from pieces to camera with Alice, you do know when you're on location, you're getting those. But for kind of all those other things that we do, filming conversations, show and tells, actuality, you just do the very best you can on the day and have a slight sense, if it's a failure.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you're up at 6, you get into bed about midnight, and then you're up at 6. And it's not one day, right? You're covering the length and breadth of Britain, and we try and do the shoots in big chunks for cost efficiencies, really. So you'd be doing like 6, 7, 8 days on about.
Yeah, and actually Bamburgh was really tiring, because the other thing that we did there was we'd chosen to use it as a kind of motif for the Anglo-Saxon film, because it's such a beautiful location and such a significant Anglo-Saxon location. And on one of the days, we decided that we'd shoot a lot of pieces to camera. I think there were probably about 15 pieces to camera to shoot in one day. And of course, you want them all to look different and feel a bit different, and some of them, you kind of think about the tone of them and what will be better, what backdrop will be better, what movement will be better, whether it's camera movement or Alice, or so they take time. And I was very nervous that we wouldn't get through all those. On top of that, what if it rains, and then you have a reduced amount of time, and we worked really hard, and it was kind of relentless for everybody. And I don't think we could have done it without a presenter like Alice, who just, gets her piece to camera in her head, and then it is, you don't need lots of takes, and she makes them feel like her, they're just natural,
So, sorry. So you've spoken to hundreds of archaeologists, you've sifted through these stories, you've gone on recce's, had a look wherever you can, you've picked your stories, you've filmed them over a couple of weeks. It's an enormous, what we're talking, 15 weeks at least effort. And then you get this material back to the edit suite and you have to start all over again.
Yeah, I like to, and not everyone is the same, but I like to, work quite hard on my shooting script, so that everyone, because then everybody knows what you're planning and what you're thinking. But it is just a shooting script. And then when you get into and my editor also gets to read the shooting script, so he gets a sense of the story and the material. But really, it's sort of throwing everything away and just you're going to make the best film that you've got with the material that you've got in the edit. And actually, it's really important not to be tied to what you thought was going to happen on location, because it's not necessarily the best thing that happened, and not necessarily, the thing that you thought would be the most fascinating thing isn't necessarily the most fascinating thing.
So talk about the editor's job. Who was your editor? Tony Quinn?
Yep. Yeah. So Tony is, as you know, he's a really experienced editor. He's worked a lot for the BBC and worked for us in Time Watch, and I chose him deliberately because I wasn't as experienced as him, and so it was good to have a safe pair of hands, and because he knows history, and we get on well. So he was, I guess we would have had a 6-week edit, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 6 or 7 week, which
7, I think.
Yeah. And we get into the edit. I would have chatted to him a couple of times before the edit. I'd like to keep people, as soon as I know who's working on the film, I like to kind of keep them, just keep in touch with them and talk to them about some of the things that are going on, so that they feel engaged with it. And then we get into the edit. What we did on this was, which isn't always the case, but we decided to go through the pieces to camera first, partly because it makes me feel really good looking at the pieces to camera, because I know they all work, so I give myself a little lift, and but also it gives you the spine of the film, and so we did that, and then you have to start looking, for me, kind of in almost an isolated way at each story, and then you usually, one of the most sort of time-consuming and arduous bits is, and it takes probably the first week actually on something like this, is going through the interviews. And you might have transcripts, you might have read through them on paper. That's not the same as seeing them on the screen and listening to them. And so then you have to go through, hours of interviews, choosing the best bit.
And Tony's the first fresh pair of eyes on this material.
Yeah.
And, does he sit there mutely saying, yes, whatever you want? Or does he say, no, this is better than that? How does it work in the edit?
Toby's definitely not mute, and I don't like working with editors who are. And we definitely, have some arguments. We don't agree on everything. But he's very good at, one of the things that someone taught me, maybe it was on this, not a very nice phrase, but I stick by it and always have, it's that you have to learn to kill your babies. So the stuff that you have agonized over and you just think is going to be wonderful television, if you get into the edit and the editor's going, I don't really understand, or, this is a bit dull, or, whatever it might be, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't seem to fit in this film. In the end, you have to make those calls, and you have to be able to go, yeah, it's not the best bit of telly. I might have stayed up till midnight filming it, and but it's got to go.
And like, editing is just put the good bits in, I think, when you're starting, because films end up nothing like, I think, in my experience, you think they're going to be. But you put all the good bits in and you think that's a fantastic piece of television. And then really weirdly, by the end of the film, you might leave that out. As you say, you might kill that particular baby because it just doesn't fit with the story that wants to tell itself. And it's not like science. It's not like drama. We don't follow our scripts. We just get the good stuff. And the film just has a life of its own. So tell me a bit about the worst moment, I think, in any producer's life, the first viewing, when I, as the executive producer, come in. So we're about 5 weeks in, you're kind of running out of time. You're showing me a partial, it's a complete assembly. It's longer than the film will be. It's not tightened up, but you think this is the film you want to make. Talk about what that's like.
I mean, tough. I still don't like those first viewings, because you're so close to your material, and you know that somebody is going to come in and as an executive producer, your job is not to come in and go, oh, haven't you done well? Isn't that lovely? It's to go, well, we've got to get this film finished in the next week or 2 weeks. Let's cut to, the quick and talk about what's working and what isn't working. And I think that for me as well was my first 1 hour. So I was, that was probably the peak level of my anxiety. I would rather not be in the room, quite frankly, and I sort of still feel like that to this day. But it was all right. I obviously have worked with you a few times, and I like the way that we work well together. And as an exec producer, you're very good at coming in and seeing the bigger picture and saying stuff that actually makes the film better. And a lot of that is structural as well. Why, if you actually, this would work better if you put it this way around. And not looking at the minutiae, but that kind of, let's make this film, this is potentially really good, but let's really make it sing. When you're filming Anglo-Saxon archaeology generally, because it's fields and it's mud and it's all very brown and visually you feel like you want something else. And we had some amazing objects in our film. We had a kind of very high status late Anglo-Saxon ring that was found at Berkeley Castle by the archaeologist from Bristol University, and we had various sort of adornments and tiny artefacts that were found in they were being conserved by archaeologists at Sittingbourne, and they are, when you look at them, I mean, when you look at them in your hands, you can see they're great, but what it struck me that, you know, you can't really see the kind of fine detail, the like threads of gold, and, you know, the sort of artistry that's gone into them. So I decided to take a macro lens and a magnifying diopter to really fill the screen with these objects, blow them up to the biggest size that we could, and with some of them we did various camera moves and things like that. Sometimes you don't need to; you just want to hold on it and look at it, and then suddenly, you know, you have a screen filled with gold and the red of garnet and you know, this tiny what's called filigree, which is like thread, like this woven thread of gold. And the ring in Berkeley Castle was it just looked like a great ring, but then you blew it up and there were kind of 4 wolf heads that were all like perfectly carved. It looks like something that could be made now, you know, pristine, and you don't see that quite so powerfully if it's not filling the screen.
My mum always used to say those were her favourite bits, and can't you slow down and spend more time showing us the things? Yeah. So I think that was kind of always a good note. Thanks for that, Mum. So, yeah. I mean, thanks very much, Sarah, for letting us in on the process of making Series 1 of Digging for Britain. Did we expect it to become the phenomenal hit that it has been?
I mean, you might have a different experience to this as the executive producer. I think, you know, when you're making it as a director, you're just so tied up with the day-to-day I suppose firefighting and, you know, the actual nuts and bolts of making a film, and, you know, being on location, which is an exhausting but exhilarating process. You just don't really know. I mean, you get to the end of the edit and to the post and the final post, and you put it together and you sit back and think, oh, this is great, you know, I'm so proud of this. But whether I actually thought this was going to keep going for like 10 series, I think it is now. Yeah, I don't think I could have anticipated that. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well done. You kind of made it happen. We made it happen. So congratulations to Alice and to all the team who are still making Digging for Britain 10 series on. This has been brought to you by the Content Club. Our mission is to try and open up the world of TV production, to gather people into a club, and to try and fund and make more great content. Thanks very much. See you again.